This morning, President Trump is calling on Republicans to change the rules in the Senate to reopen the government. Trump posting overnight, it is now time for the Republicans to play their Trump card and go for what is called the nuclear option. Get rid of the filibuster and get rid of it now. Meanwhile, millions of Americans fear their food assistance or SNAP benefits will run out tomorrow as the government shutdown drags on.
I've gone to social media to ask for help from everyone that I could possibly think of.
And it's hard for me to understand how this isn't an emergency. Republicans argue it's not that easy.
If they transfer funds from these other sources, it pulls it away immediately from school meals and infant formula.
Okay, so picture this. You're the president of the United States. You've got all this power, right? You can sign executive orders. You can direct federal agencies. You can reshape policy with the stroke of a pen. And for a while, you've been doing exactly that. Signing order after order, pushing the boundaries, testing the limits, seeing how far you can go. And then one day, boom, Congress says no. Federal courts say no. They don't just push back. They don't just complain or hold hearings. They actually stop you. They veto your orders. They block your actions. They tell you in no uncertain terms that you've gone too far, that you've crossed the line, that what you're trying to do is unconstitutional, unlawful, and not going to happen, not on their watch. And suddenly, all that power you thought you had, it's crumbling. It's falling apart. Because you just ran headfirst into the limits of presidential authority. And those limits, they're real, they're enforceable, and they're being enforced right now against Donald Trump. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
The judge dismissing the administration's explanation, saying, "I want agency action, not lawyering. We're not going to make everyone drop dead." The judge could compel the administration to release the funds, but whether the Trump administration will comply remains to be seen.
To double what it costs for us to live just to have health insurance.
Republicans argue the Affordable Care Act, which set up Obamacare, was a bad law that drives up premiums and strains doctors. President Trump last night posting, quote, "Obamacare is a disaster."
This is wild. This is unprecedented in the modern era. We're watching Congress, including some Republicans, join with Democrats to override Trump's executive orders. We're watching federal judges issue permanent blocks on Trump's most aggressive actions. We're watching a full-scale institutional pushback against a president who thought he could govern by decree. And the message is clear. Presidents are not kings. They are not dictators. They cannot just do whatever they want, whenever they want, regardless of the Constitution or the law. There are checks and balances. There are limits. And Trump just found out the hard way that those limits still exist, even for him, even after everything he's gotten away with before. This time, the system is fighting back, and it's winning. So let's talk about it. Let's break down what's happening, which executive orders are being blocked, why Congress and the courts are taking such aggressive action, and what this means for Trump's presidency going forward. Because trust me, this is a turning point. This is the moment when Trump's power grab finally hit a wall, and that wall is holding. Now, here's what's been happening. Over the past several months, Trump has been signing executive orders left and right, tariffs, regulation rollbacks, voter registration requirements, federal funding restrictions, government shutdown tactics, you name it. Trump's tried to do it through executive action, and for a while, it seemed like he might get away with it, like he always does, like he always has, but not this time, because on October 31st, 2025, a federal judge issued a permanent block on parts of Trump's executive order requiring new voter registration documentation. The judge didn't just delay the order or send it back for revision. No, a permanent block. The judge said Trump's order was illegal executive overreach, that the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally change how voter registration works, that what Trump was trying to do violated federal law and the Constitution. And so the order is dead, blocked, permanently. Trump can't enforce it. He can't implement it. It's over. And that was just the beginning, because Congress got involved too. On April 29, 2025, lawmakers intervened to override Trump's regulation repeal plans. They invoked their constitutional authority and forced Trump's cabinet to halt actions deemed unlawful under his executive orders. Think about that for a second. Congress didn't just complain. They didn't just hold symbolic votes or issue strongly worded letters. They actually used their power to stop Trump, to veto his orders, to say, "No, Mr. President, you don't have the authority to do this. We're not going to let you." And here's what makes this even more significant. It wasn't just Democrats doing this. Some Republicans joined in too. Republicans who normally support Trump, who normally give him whatever he wants, looked at these executive orders and said, yeah, this is too much. This crosses the line. We can't let this stand. That's huge. That's a crack in Republican unity. That's a sign that even Trump's own party has limits on what they're willing to tolerate. And Trump, he's not happy about it. Reports are coming out of the White House describing him as furious, raging at his advisors, demanding to know how this could happen, how Congress and the courts could dare to defy him. But here's the thing. They're not defying him. They're doing their jobs. They're enforcing the Constitution. They're upholding the rule of law. They're making sure that no president, not even Donald Trump, can operate as a monarch who governs by decree. And the numbers tell the story. According to legal experts and government watchdogs, Trump's executive orders have been challenged in courts more than 38 times in recent months. 38 times. That's not normal. That's not business as usual. That's a president who is consistently, repeatedly trying to do things he doesn't have the legal authority to do, and the courts are consistently, repeatedly telling him no. Multiple actions have been stopped by injunctions and judicial review. Multiple orders have been struck down as unconstitutional, and the pattern is clear. Trump thinks he can do whatever he wants, and the judicial system keeps reminding him that he can't. Congressional leaders have been pretty blunt about this. After vetoing Trump's latest attempts at unilateral rule, they issued a statement saying, presidents are not monarchs. They do not operate by decree. Legally, they can only act in accordance with constitutional and statutory law. That's not a partisan attack. That's a civics lesson. That's a reminder of how American government is supposed to work, and it's a direct rebuke of Trump's approach to the presidency. So yeah, this is the story. Trump's power is crumbling. His executive orders are being vetoed and blocked. Congress and the courts are pushing back. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like the system of checks and balances might actually be working. Let's break it down. All right, so let's dig into what's actually happening here. Because this isn't just one executive order getting blocked. This isn't just one court case or one congressional action. This is a systematic, coordinated pushback against Trump's entire approach to executive power. And it's happening on multiple fronts at the same time. Let's start with the courts. The October 31st ruling on voter registration is a perfect example of how this is playing out. Trump signed an executive order earlier this year that would have required new documentation for voter registration. The stated goal was to prevent voter fraud, to make sure only eligible citizens are voting. Sounds reasonable, right? Except there's a problem. The president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally change voting laws. That's not how it works. Voting regulations are set by Congress and by state legislatures. The president can't just wake up one day and decide to add new requirements. That's not within his constitutional powers, but Trump tried anyway. He signed the order, he directed federal agencies to implement it, and voting rights groups immediately sued. And on October 31st, they won. The federal judge didn't just issue a temporary injunction. That happens all the time. Courts put temporary holds on executive actions while they review the legal arguments. But this was different. This was a permanent block. The judge looked at Trump's order, looked at the law, and said, nope, this is illegal. The president doesn't have this authority. The order violates federal law. It's unconstitutional. And it's permanently blocked. Trump can't enforce it now. He can't enforce it later. It's done. And that's significant because it's not just about voter registration. It's about the principle. It's about establishing that there are real enforceable limits on what the president can do through executive action. And those limits apply to Trump just like they'd apply to any other president. Now let's talk about Congress, because what happened on April 29th is almost even more remarkable. Trump had been using executive orders to repeal regulations he didn't like. Environmental regulations, financial regulations, consumer protection rules. He was just wiping them off the books with the stroke of a pen. And for a while, it seemed like he could. But then Congress stepped in. They invoked the Congressional Review Act and other constitutional authorities to override Trump's actions. They forced his cabinet to halt implementation of orders deemed unlawful. And here's the key thing. This wasn't just Democrats. Republicans joined in too. Why? Because even Republicans who generally support deregulation, even Republicans who want to roll back Obama-era rules, they recognize that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. You can't just have the president unilaterally decide which laws apply and which don't. That's not how separation of powers works. If you want to repeal a regulation, you need to go through the proper legal process. You need to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. You need to provide justification and allow for public comment. You can't just ignore all of that because it's inconvenient. And that's what Trump was trying to do. He was trying to bypass the entire regulatory process and just govern by fiat. And Congress said, no, we're not allowing that. We're using our constitutional authority to stop you. And they did. They actually did it. That's huge. That's Congress reasserting its role as a co-equal branch of government. That's lawmakers saying, We're not just going to rubber stamp whatever the president wants. We have a duty to uphold the Constitution, and we're going to do it. Now, let's look at the bigger picture. According to the legal tracking done by organizations like Just Security, Trump's executive orders have been challenged in court more than 38 times in recent months, 38 separate legal challenges. And many of those challenges have succeeded. Courts have issued injunctions. They've struck down orders. They've sent them back to agencies for reconsideration. They've imposed permanent blocks. That's an extraordinary level of judicial pushback, and it tells you something important. Trump isn't just pushing the boundaries of executive power. He's repeatedly, systematically violating the law. He's signing orders that he knows or should know exceed his constitutional authority, and he's betting that he can get away with it, that the courts will move slowly, that Congress won't have the votes to stop him, that by the time anyone figures out how to push back, the damage will already be done. And for a while, that strategy kind of worked, but not anymore, because now the courts are moving faster. They're issuing permanent blocks instead of just temporary holds. And Congress is using every tool at its disposal to rein Trump in, and the Supreme Court is getting involved too. There are currently cases pending before the court on Trump's tariff authority, on his shutdown maneuvers, on his regulatory actions, and the fact that the Supreme Court is willing to take these cases, willing to review Trump's actions, that's significant, because it means even the highest court in the land thinks there are serious questions about whether Trump is operating within the bounds of his constitutional authority. Let's also talk about the substance of what Trump has been trying to do, because it's not just that he's exceeding his authority, it's what he's trying to use that authority for. Take the tariffs, for example. Trump has imposed tariffs on countries around the world, claiming he's protecting American industry and national security. But economists across the political spectrum say these tariffs are damaging the economy. They're raising prices for consumers. They're hurting American businesses that rely on imported materials. They're triggering retaliatory tariffs that are devastating American farmers and manufacturers. And the legal question is, does the president actually have the unilateral authority to impose these tariffs, or does that power belong to Congress? Because the Constitution says Congress has the power to regulate international commerce. The president has some delegated authority in this area, sure, but can he just impose tariffs whenever he wants, for whatever reason he wants, without congressional approval? That's what the Supreme Court is going to have to decide. And if they rule against Trump, if they say he's exceeded his authority, that's going to be a massive blow to his entire economic agenda. Or look at the government shutdown tactics. Trump has been using the threat of shutdowns and actual shutdowns to try to force Congress to give him what he wants. But is that constitutional? Can the president deliberately refuse to sign funding bills, deliberately shut down the government as a negotiating tactic? Or is that a violation of his duty to faithfully execute the laws? Because when the government shuts down, laws don't get enforced, services don't get provided, the government stops functioning, and arguably, that's a violation of the president's constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Courts are starting to look at that question, Congress is pushing back against it, and Trump is finding that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't have as much leverage as he thought he did. And then there are the regulation rollbacks. Trump has been trying to undo environmental protections, financial regulations, consumer safety rules, all through executive action. But many of those regulations were put in place through a formal legal process. Agencies studied the issues, they gathered public comments, they wrote detailed justifications, and under the law, you can't just undo all of that with a wave of the presidential hand. You have to go through the same process to repeal a regulation as you did to create it. You have to provide evidence and reasoning. You have to explain why the change is warranted. And Trump hasn't been doing that. He's just been signing orders saying, repeal this, roll back that, without following the proper procedures. And courts are saying, nope, that's not legal. You have to follow the law, even if you're the president. So what we're seeing is a comprehensive rejection of Trump's approach to executive power. Courts are blocking his orders. Congress is overriding his actions. The Supreme Court is reviewing his most controversial moves. And even some Republicans are joining the pushback. This is a constitutional crisis in the sense that we're having a fundamental debate about the limits of presidential authority. But it's also the Constitution working exactly as it's supposed to. The system of checks and balances is checking and balancing. The other branches of government are restraining an overreaching executive, and democracy, for all its messiness and conflict, is holding, at least for now. Let's talk about what happens next. Okay, so let's break down what all of this means going forward. Because Trump's power crumbling isn't just a one-time event, it's the beginning of a new phase in his presidency. A phase where he can't just do whatever he wants, where Congress and the courts are actively constraining him, where the limits of executive authority are being enforced in real time, and that changes everything. First, let's talk about the immediate political consequences. Trump's entire brand is built on the idea that he's strong, that he's a winner, that he gets things done. He's the guy who makes deals, who doesn't take no for an answer, who bends Washington to his will. But what happens to that brand when Congress and the courts keep telling him no? When his executive orders keep getting blocked? When his big policy initiatives keep getting struck down as illegal? It makes him look weak. It makes him look ineffective. It undermines the core narrative that has defined his political career. And that's a problem for Trump, because if he can't deliver wins, if he can't point to major accomplishments, then what's the argument for keeping him in power? Why should voters support him if he can't actually get anything done? Democrats are already seizing on this. They're running ads highlighting all the times Trump's orders have been blocked. They're pointing out that Trump thinks he's above the law, but the courts keep proving he's not. They're arguing that Trump's approach to governance is chaotic, illegal, and ultimately ineffective. And it's a powerful message, because it's not based on opinion or ideology. It's based on facts. It's based on court rulings and congressional votes. It's based on the objective reality that Trump keeps trying to do things he doesn't have the legal authority to do, and he keeps getting stopped. Now, Trump's response to all of this has been pretty predictable. He's attacking the judges. He's calling them partisan hacks. He's claiming the courts are part of the deep state conspiracy against him. He's raging at Congress for not backing him up. He's telling his supporters that the system is rigged, that the establishment is trying to stop him from helping the American people. Standard Trump playbook: deflect blame, attack institutions, play the victim. But here's the problem. That strategy works better when Trump is fighting from the outside, when he's the challenger, the outsider, the guy taking on the corrupt establishment. It doesn't work as well when he's the president, when he's the one with power, because at some point people start asking, if you're so powerful, why can't you get anything done? If the courts keep blocking you, maybe it's not because they're corrupt. Maybe it's because what you're trying to do is actually illegal. Second, let's talk about the long-term constitutional implications, because what's happening right now is going to shape the presidency for decades to come. The questions being decided in these court cases, the precedents being set by Congress, they're going to define the boundaries of executive power for future presidents, and that matters. Because if Trump loses these fights, if the courts and Congress successfully restrain his overreach, then that strengthens the system of checks and balances for everyone going forward. It establishes clear limits on what presidents can and cannot do through executive action. It reaffirms that we're a nation of laws, not a nation of one man's will. But if Trump wins, if he finds ways to circumvent these restrictions, if he establishes precedents that allow presidents to govern by decree, then we're heading toward something much more dangerous. We're heading toward an imperial presidency, toward a system where the executive branch is so powerful that Congress and the courts can't effectively check it. And that would be a fundamental change in how American government works. That would be a step away from democracy and towards something more authoritarian. So the stakes here are huge. This isn't just about Trump. It's about what kind of government we're going to have going forward. And right now, the forces of constitutional restraint seem to be winning. Courts are enforcing limits. Congress is pushing back. The system is working, but the fight is far from over. Third, let's talk about what this means for Trump's remaining time in office. Because if Trump can't govern through executive orders anymore, if Congress and the courts are going to block his most aggressive actions, then how is he going to accomplish anything? The answer is he's going to have to work with Congress. He's going to have to negotiate. He's going to have to compromise. He's going to have to go through the normal legislative process like every other president. And honestly, Trump is terrible at that. He doesn't like compromise. He doesn't like the slow, grinding work of building coalitions and finding common ground. He wants to just issue orders and have things happen. But that's not how it works. At least it's not supposed to be how it works. And now Trump is being forced to confront that reality. He's being forced to operate within the constraints of the Constitution. And he doesn't like it. He's not good at it, and it's showing. We're likely to see Trump become increasingly frustrated and erratic as this continues. As more of his orders get blocked, as more of his initiatives fail, he's going to lash out. He's going to attack institutions. He's going to test boundaries in new ways. And that's going to create more crises, more confrontations, more legal battles. The next year or so of Trump's presidency is going to be defined by this struggle. Trump pushing, institutions pushing back, courts issuing rulings, Congress asserting authority, and the American people watching, trying to figure out which side they're on. Fourth, let's talk about the broader implications for American democracy, because what's happening right now is a test. It's a test of whether our constitutional system can withstand a president who doesn't respect its limits. And so far, the system is passing that test. Judges are standing up to presidential pressure. Lawmakers are putting constitution over party. Institutions are doing their jobs. But the test isn't over, because Trump isn't going away quietly. He's going to keep fighting. He's going to keep trying to expand his power. He's going to keep testing boundaries. And the question is, will the system continue to hold? Will judges keep issuing brave rulings even when Trump attacks them? Will Republicans in Congress keep joining with Democrats to restrain executive overreach even when it costs them politically with Trump's base. Will the American people support these institutional checks, or will they side with Trump and demand that he be allowed to do whatever he wants? We don't know the answer yet, but we're going to find out because the next few months are crucial. If Trump backs down, if he accepts these constraints and starts working within the system, then maybe we get through this okay. But if he doubles down, if he refuses to accept any limits on his authority, if he tries to defy court orders or Congress, then we could be heading for a genuine constitutional crisis. The kind where institutions break down, where the rule of law collapses, where democracy itself is at risk. And I'm not being hyperbolic. That's the real danger here. When a president refuses to accept the legitimacy of courts and Congress, when he tells his supporters that the entire system is corrupt and needs to be torn down, that's how democracies die. That's how you end up with authoritarianism. So yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher. Trump's power is crumbling. His executive orders are being blocked. Congress and the courts are asserting their constitutional authority. And the question now is, what happens next? Does Trump accept these limits, or does he escalate the conflict? My guess? He escalates. Because that's what Trump always does. He doesn't back down. He doesn't accept defeat. He doubles down and fights harder. And that means we're in for a very turbulent period. More executive orders that push boundaries, more court cases, more congressional showdowns, more chaos. But here's the thing. The system is holding, at least so far. Judges are doing their jobs. Lawmakers are standing up. The Constitution is being enforced. And that gives me hope. Because it means that even in the face of a president who doesn't respect democratic norms, who doesn't care about constitutional limits, the system can still work. The checks and balances can still function. Democracy can still survive. But it requires vigilance. It requires courage. It requires institutions and individuals willing to stand up and say, no, this far and no further. The law applies to everyone, even the president, especially the president. And right now, thank God there are still enough people willing to say that, still enough judges and lawmakers and citizens who believe in the rule of law, who believe that democracy is worth fighting for, who believe that America is a nation of laws, not a nation of one man's will. So what's the bottom line? Trump's power is crumbling because he overreached. He thought he could govern by decree. He thought he was above the law, and he's finding out the hard way that he's not. Congress is pushing back. Courts are blocking his orders. The system is working. And while the fight is far from over, while Trump will continue to test boundaries and create crises, there's reason for optimism. The Constitution is holding. Democracy is surviving. And the rule of law still means something in America, at least for now. So yeah, stay tuned, because this story is going to define the next chapter of American politics. The battle between presidential power and constitutional limits, between one man's ambition and a nation's commitment to democracy. And we're all going to have to decide which side we're on, because the future of the country depends on it.